Most prolific writers, James Baldwin. In 1980, Baldwin, the author of Go Tell It on the Mountain and The Fire Next Time, spoke to a group protesting proposed federal budget cuts. The late James Baldwin.
America, quiet as it's kept, has no allies and no friends. It has satellites and client states. It has business partners, but the only friend is a terrifying irony that the white American has in this world. The only person who knows anything about him, the only person who cares anything about him, is the American black man. Whether or not he knows it, we know that we are flesh of each other's flesh. We, the colors of black people, and we are every color under heaven. If you look at the colors of black people, you are reading American history. Now, that is about all I have to say, except that I was telling my friend John Lewis a few minutes ago, it seems like old times. We're back where we started, but not quite back where we started. I think we learned something during the 60s, which will stand us in good stead now. I think we learned a terrifying thing, and we learned now for the first time what an American promise meant, and the immorality which the so-called civil rights movement was trying to reach, to cause it to, as Malcolm X put it, to atone. Malcolm X said he wanted America to atone. And it turns out the 60s proved that the country is not capable of atonement. That is a very serious matter. Now it is in the hands of those people, white and black, who have some sense of where we are, some sense of what real responsibility is, and a real sense that though the Western world is in trouble, no, I'll put it another way. We, the so-called minority in this country, are in trouble. But the country may be doomed. The Western world, in any case, is certainly doomed. Because the economic system, which is responsible for our presence in this park, and responsible for the deaths in so many ways of so many black boys and girls, the greed that rules this country, the indifference to human life which rules this country, is something that the world cannot afford. And what the world cannot afford, the world has always found a way to get rid of. We are talking about the end of a kingdom, the end of a way of thought, the end of a certain sense of reality. But it is important to remember that whereas we may be minority legally in this country, we are majority in the world. And between now and the year 2000, which is only 20 years, we must find a way to forge the links which will save us all over the world. All that holds the Western world together now are multinational corporations and banks and the threat of extinction. I beg you to remember, and I'll leave you now, that in all of Europe's history, all that time, Europe has agreed about one thing only. One thing only. The only thing that Europe has ever agreed about was us. And the only question during these horrifying family quarrels was which family would have us. Well, that day is over. Another day begins, and we have to gird up our loins to deal with what is coming, because if we don't save our children, and our children are all we have, if we don't save our children, nobody else will do it. Thank you very much.
We are proud of you. Yeah. We are proud of you. of you say we are proud of you.
Mr. Baldwin, how would you describe the situation that America is in internationally and domestically?
Well, it's hard to separate the two, you know. Let's take the domestic situation first. The domestic situation is very close to chaos. You know, it's a social chaos which is a result, if you see what I mean, of the failure or the betrayal of what we have to call the social contract. The social contract made in principle with all citizens in the society. You know, and you are a citizen, I am too. And the contract with us has never been honored. And that means that every citizen of this country is in terrible trouble, because when you're in trouble, Detroit is in trouble, if you see what I mean. And the white people of this country have wrecked their own cities in a flight from us, you know? So that's domestically, not putting it much too simply, because it's a very loaded question. Internationally, though, it's not possible to flee from the world, you know, and I repeat, the world is not white, you know? And the example in this country of black people, you know, is not lost on the world, which I repeat is not white, you know, and there's not enough money or enough, there's not enough to seduce, you know, black people in this country or in the world into the Western way of life, because there's not enough left over to go around for white people, you know. And the generation which, roughly speaking, rules in Africa now or in various non-white countries, which all come in one way or another out of the Western crucible, you know, out of the missionary schools, out of the Catholic schools, out of the West, in fact, you know, to put it very cruelly, innately created for Europe or Western purposes. That generation will have to die before we will really know anything about Africa. You know what I mean? But that is happening. And the gold and diamonds, etc., which belong to Europe and which belong to us, which the Western world is squabbling over now, will no longer be their property. It has to be returned to its rightful owner.
You have stated on many occasions that the world is not white. We in this country, black people, as you know, are considered a minority group in this country. Do you think that there is some kind of game being played on black people in this regard?
Oh, yeah. As long as you persuade me that I'm part of a minority, you're saying, in effect, that my frame of reference has to be someone else, because I'm a minority. A minority, by definition, needs help of the majority. That is part of the rock on which the civil rights movement, you know, crashed. But in fact, once I realized that I'm not a minority and that you're lying to me, you know, that you are, in fact, a minority, and we're talking about color, you know, then something else happens. And that's part of the crisis. It's part of the game plan on the part of the West. I'm by no means certain. I don't believe the American press in any case. But the whole storm about Cubans and Haitians seems to me a little artificial. And it really is intended in some level to further confound confusion, you know, to have us fighting the Cubans and the Haitians instead of the people who are really oppressing us. Because the Cubans and the Haitians are also victims of the same morality, you know, of the same sense of power, the same, it is the Western world, after all, which created the situation which Haitians find themselves, all the Cubans find themselves. You know, the Bay of Pigs didn't happen 1,000 years ago.
So what do you think the posture of black people should be regarding the Haitians and the Cubans?
I think that one has simply to, realize that they are also slaves. You know, they have been produced by the same circumstances that produced us, in spite of the difference in language. I remember when the Puerto Ricans came to New York, not so very long ago, and the Puerto Rican boy in the garment center, standing next to you in the garment center, looking just like you, but speaking no English. You know, you distrusted him because you thought he was trying to be something else, but he was a Puerto Rican. You didn't know he was a nigger until he got here. And he didn't speak English, he spoke Spanish. He, on the other hand, thought you wouldn't speak any Spanish because you thought you were better than he was. And that lasted for about 10, 15 years. Now that's over. But that was not an act of God either. You know, the one thing the Western world is most terrified of is the unification of black people.
Today we hear a lot about America's, quote, image, end quote, problem. What do you think is responsible for America's, quote, image problem?
Her image problem is simply the fact that she's never kept a single promise she made to anyone anywhere. You know, the gap between the American image, the American pretensions, and the American reality is suddenly become visible to the entire world. It was always visible to us.
Of course, the country is now faced with a situation in Iran. What do you think the posture of black Americans is regarding the Iranian situation?
Well, as far as I can tell, well, I'm a street boy, so I'm talking about the people I know, you know. I don't know about Negro bank presidents, for example, but the attitude of the people I know, and my own attitude too, is somewhat sardonic. First of all, leaving aside the ridiculous hoax of the rescue attempt, because that's a hoax. It's a way of doing two things. First of all, of distracting attention, you know, from what is going on in this country, and it is also a way, which I find insane, but I think it's true, a way of preparing the American public for yet another war, to get them riled up against, you know, the same way that during the Second World War, the country became incensed against the Japanese, you know, not against the Germans, I beg you to remark. And the Germans were never incarcerated, you know, the Japanese were. And now it's the Iranians and other people like that, you know.
Why do you think the Germans were not incarcerated and the Japanese were?
Europe had nothing against Hitler, and neither did we, until he turned his guns against them. The first European power to sign a concord with Hitler was the Pope. Winston Churchill had nothing against Hitler until London was in trouble. And England sold all of Europe to Hitler. You know, after all, let's face it, anti-Semitism is ingrained in the Western tradition. You know, they're very pleased that Hitler found the final solution.
So back to my initial question, what would you say the attitude of black Americans is regarding the Iranian situation?
I think they think it's, I can't say on television, a BS tip. You know, it has nothing to do with their situation, you know. It has nothing to do with the reality. It has to do with money, it has to do with oil. You know, the energy crisis is an elegant phrase which really disguises what happens when you lose your colonies and lose your slaves. You know, the Western world hasn't really lost them yet, but they're losing them. You know, what has happened in Iran is going to happen all over the world, and indeed it has begun to happen all over the world. You know, England has no colonies anymore, not really. You know, all they have now is banks, and when you lose a captive population, you know, your days and, you know, your hours are numbered. Because no amount of terror, no amount of power, you haven't got enough jails, you know, when a people have understood something, you know, and you haven't got to have millions of people, really. You have to have that leaven, that handful of people even, who help awaken the rest. But once that has happened, the clock does not go back. You know, South Africa's lost to the West. It will be a very bloody battle, but the issue is not in doubt.
We always hear people say that our future, black people's future, lies with the young. What do you think black parents, black adults, should be telling black children about the world, the international situation?
I think they should try to make their children see it for what it is. I think that we have a great crisis in education here in this country now. In all the black schools, all schools, in fact, that I've been to, involving black students. And this is partly, this is deliberate in the first place. It's one of the results of the fragmentation, especially in the North, of the Negro community, of the black community. And I suppose that the education of our children has got to be taken in our own hands, you know, because the white republic cannot educate our children, and never has, by the way.